Before we go into today's Farbrengen, we'll go over, just for a few minutes, some of the inyanim which the Rebbe spoke about in the Shavuos Farbrengen last Shabbos. Last Shabbos afternoon, which was the second day of Shavuos. In a series of sichos in the Shavuos Farbrengen, the Rebbe stressed how we find several inyanim that have all taken place on Shavuos, and there is a very obvious relation between of all these inyanim. First and foremost, Shavuos is the day of Matan Torah. That's why we celebrate this Yontev, because on this day the Rebbe gave us the Torah. That is the greatest thing which Shavuos stands for. However, together with this, on Shavuos we also have the fact that Shavuos is the day that David HaMelech passed away, which this happened naturally quite a while later, but it also happened on Shavuos, as well as another inyan which happened much later, but again it took place on Shavuos, and this is the fact that the Baal Shem Tov passed away on the first day of Shavuos, and his burial, he was nikbar, that took place on the second day of Shavuos. Another inyan, the Rebbe said, which for some reason is not paid too much attention to, but this is another inyan which has a very strong shaykhus to us, and this is the fact that a year after the Baal Shem Tov passed away, the Baal Shem Tov passed away on Shavuos, but a year later, his closest disciple, the Maggid of Mizrich, took over the leadership of the Adasa Hasidim. And again, this also took place when on Shavuos. And being that this is something which played such a major role in the life of the Maggid, and we know that the Alter Rebbe was one of the closest disciples of the Maggid of Mizrich, so Mamela, this has a very strong shaykhus to us Hasidim as well, because all the Rabbeim in turn have all the shaykhus to the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe's Rebbe, the Maggid of Mizrich, assumed leadership of Hasidim also on the day of Shavuos. So we must say that there is a shaykhus between all of these inyan. The most obvious shaykhus, which the Rebbe pointed out, was the fact that all of them were leaders. All of them were, this expression as we find, like shepherds. Just like we find the pasuk, Moshe hoya roya, Moshe was a shepherd. So the Chazal comment on this pasuk that when the Rebbe saw how Moshe Rabbeinu was taking care of his sheep, how he was caring after each and every one of them. In fact, the Medrash tells us that there was one little sheep that ran away from Moshe Rabbeinu, and the way Moshe Rabbeinu was so concerned that he ran after this sheep to catch it and to bring it back with the rest of the group. So the Medrash continues that when the Rebbe saw this, he said that Moshe is suitable to be a leader of Klal Yisrael. And the Rebbe pointed out, here we see what the attitude of a Manig Yisrael should be. Not only does he take care of his sheep that are with him and those that are following him, but even in the case when there is one of the sheep that runs away from the group, and the same thing in the spiritual sense, when there's a Yid that is not sticking to his leader, but on the contrary is running away from the leader, running away from the Roy Yisrael, and from the path that the Roy Yisrael is trying that he should follow, and this individual is selecting a completely different path for oneself. So here we see what the attitude of a Nasi Yisrael, what the attitude of a leader by Yidden is, that he has to go after this individual as well, though this individual is definitely doing something unwanted and something wrong. But at the same time to go after him and see to it that he's also brought back with the rest of the group, with the rest of the sheep, just like we find many times in Psukim and in Chazal, how all of Klal Yisrael are compared to sheep. And go after this individual and bring him back, that he should again join together with all of Klal Yisrael, with the entire group of the sheep. As well, we find the same by David HaMelech. The Rebbe continues that David HaMelech, Medrash tells us, was also a shepherd. He was taking care of the sheep of his father Yishai, and the Medrash tells us also the same thing as we find B'negei Moshe Rabbeinu, that the Rebbe saw Badak LeDavid B'tzayin U'matzei Roya Yathei, found him a suitable shepherd. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu commented, whoever can take care of these sheep is suitable to come and take care and provide the needs of my nation. So again, here we see that as a result of his dedication as a shepherd, this brought about to him later to be elevated to serve as a shepherd of all of Klal Yisrael. Same thing we find Benegei the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov, before he revealed himself as the Baal Shem Tov, it is not known that he was a shepherd, but what is known about the Baal Shem Tov was that he was taking care of little youngsters. He was what is called a Bahelva. He was like a teacher's aide. With the little children who were going to Cheder, the Baal Shem Tov would, those days there was no transportation, so what the Baal Shem Tov would do, he would go ahead and pick them up from their homes and bring them to Cheder, and again from Cheder would bring them back to their homes. And it is known that the Maggid of Mizrich once expressed himself, the disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, that he wished that he should have such love to a Sefer Torah, like the Baal Shem Tov expressed the love to these little children, how he hugged them and kissed them while he was taking them to Cheder and from Cheder. He wished on himself that he should have such love to Torah. So again, we find by the Baal Shem Tov the same minyan, how before he became a leader of Klal Yisrael, before he did become a Nasi B'Yisrael, he was also involved with taking care of the needs, providing the needs of the little ones and of the young. And here the Rebbe referred that the lesson that we have to take from this entire inyan is that to us as well, now this inyan is in the sense that all of us have to follow in these steps to serve in the capacity of a shepherd. But what's the pshat to serve in the capacity of a shepherd? Again, that every Jew, wherever possible, to see to it, to care for the needs of the other Yid as well. And just like we find by Moshe Rabbeinu, that Moshe Rabbeinu cared for the needs even of this individual sheep that would run away from the group. Moshe would go ahead and care after this sheep as well, and bring it back to be together with the entire group. So the same thing from us, it is demanded as well today, that is our union to serve in the sense as a spiritual shepherd. In other words, wherever we can provide the needs of another Yid, provide the needs of another Yid spiritually, or provide the needs of another Yid physically. Here the Rebbe referred to an episode that a Chassid once came to the Tzemach Tzedek, and he asked him a bracha that he does not have no will to learn. The Chassid complained on himself. And he's asking the Rebbe should give him a bracha that he should gain will to have a cheshik, to have a will to learn Torah. So the Tzemach Tzedek told him, I envy you. What should I do that I do want to learn? And the Tzemach Tzedek explained himself that the whole idea of Matan Torah and Kabbalah Torah, why the Rebbe gave the Torah to Yidden is, dafke in this world, with all the obstacles and with all the interferences that a Yid goes through. And the Yid has these interferences and at the same time overcomes them and learns Torah. This is what the Rebbe appreciates. So this is how the Tzemach Tzedek encouraged this individual Jew by telling him, but I am not in your position. Unfortunately, the Tzemach Tzedek said, I am not in such a matzav. I want to learn, so what could I do? But you are the one that can really and idealistically fulfill the entire wish of Matan Torah. Because this is exactly what the Rebbe wanted. So again, the same. In terms of this lesson, how the Rebbe continues it, though we all have obstacles and we all have interferences as far as the learning of Torah, and we know that Matan Torah stands for not only the learning of Torah, but as Chazal keep on stressing, Godel Talmud Shemei V'lidei Ma'aseh, the entire greatness of learning is that learning should lead to action. Because the idea of Matan Torah is not only that it should remain in the learning of Torah, but as well in the fulfillment of all of the mitzvahs. Which this is an inyan of Ma'aseh, an inyan of action. So by bringing about all this, Sai B'negei ourselves, and Sai B'negei another Jew as well. In other words, not just satisfying ourselves with taking care of ourselves, but seeing to bring about this influence on other Yidden as well. So this is the entire idea of Matan Torah. In the Farbrengen of Shavuos, the Rebbe went on finding further relation and connection between these three, between Moshe Rabbeinu, David HaMelech, as well as the Baal Shem Tov, to such an extent that the Rebbe quoted Moshe Rabbeinu is Torah. Everything which is mentioned in Torah is from Moshe Rabbeinu. David HaMelech is known, famous for being the author of the Sefer HaTilim, as well as various Torahs from the Baal Shem Tov which are printed in the Sefer Tzavoas HaRivosh, the will of the Rivosh Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov. The Rebbe referred to various quotations from that Sefer, because the Rebbe said this is the first Sefer that was printed that contains Torah of the Baal Shem Tov, prior to other Sfarim. There are other Sfarim also that contain Torahs of the Baal Shem Tov. However, this one was printed first. The Rebbe found equal inyanim, draw lines of equal inyanim between the teachings of all three of them. Again, because this day has a tremendous shaykhs to all these three tremendous personalities by Klal Yisrael. I'll try to go in a little bit into today's Farbrengen. The Farbrengen of today, the Rebbe began, today is Shabbos, and it is the first Shabbos after Matan Torah. So Mamela, we must say that this Shabbos has a very close shaykhs to the day of Matan Torah. Truthfully, the Gemara tells us, L'kula alme b'Shabbos nitna Torah, that everyone agrees. What's the pshat? Everyone agrees. There's a machlokes in Gemara whether the Torah was given on the 6th of Sivan or on the 7th of Sivan. However, the Gemara concludes that everybody would agree, side those that hold that the Torah was given on the 6th, as well as those that hold that the Torah was given on the 7th, everyone will agree that Torah was given on Shabbos. In other words, it was on a Shabbos that the Rebbe gave Yidden the Torah. So the Rebbe explained that it means that we must say that Shabbos and Torah have a very strong shaykhs one to another. What's the whole idea of Torah? The whole idea of Torah is to elevate a person. A person came down into this world, into this olam, and as Hasidus keeps on stressing, olam stems from the word helem. It's a cover, it's covered up. In other words, godliness is covered in this world. However, why did the person, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, send down the person into this world? Into this world where godliness is covered and not seen. That the entire tafkid, the entire obligation of a person is to bring about and to reveal the godliness that is in this world. So this is the entire kavanah, the entire intention of HaKadosh Baruch Hu sending a neshama down into this world. The very same is the idea of Shabbos. Shabbos has the same thing, the same thought within it. In other words, though a person all week is involved in all different things, however, when it comes Shabbos, the person becomes spiritually elevated. He becomes elevated to such a level, to such a madrege, to his proper level, by far different as he was during the entire week. And here the Rebbe referred to an interesting Yerushalmi, that the Yerushalmi tells us that an Am Ha'aretz, in other words, which means a person who has not learned and he's not knowledgeable at all in Torah, when it comes on Shabbos, an Am Ha'aretz will also not lie on Shabbos. What do we see from this? Lying is something which is contradictory to the demands of Torah, naturally. So that means that this person, all week, he will fall through and he will lie. In other words, he cannot hold himself above water and hold out that he shouldn't lie when he's brought into a position which forces him, so to speak, to lie. However, even this individual who can be entitled as an Am Ha'aretz, when it comes the day of Shabbos, this person as well also acts different and will refrain from lying on Shabbos. So what do we see from this? That Shabbos elevates every Yid. Just like Torah elevates every Yid, the same thing, Shabbos as well. So this is how Shabbos and Torah have something common, something equal between them. Because the goal of Shabbos, as well as the goal of Matan Torah, is both the same idea, to elevate the human being. And here the Rebbe explained at length how we find, especially according to the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, that the Rebbe created the universe, Hamchadish b'tuvei b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh bereishis, as the Alter Rebbe, as we say in davening, and the Alter Rebbe explains at length in Shara Yichud v'Emunah, which means that the creation of the universe was not a one-time thing, how HaKadosh Baruch Hu created it me'ayin liyesh, from nothing into something. Neither is the pshat that the world, as the Rebbe explained, that the world was created by somebody else, and this somebody else who created the world meyesh liyesh, from something to something, turned over that the world should be under the leadership of the Rebbe. Not so. The Rebbe is the one that created the world, and the Rebbe is the one that is guarding the world constantly, to such an extent, as the Alter Rebbe explains, that he based on the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, that the Rebbe constantly keeps on recreating the world. So the world is constantly in a position of being created ma'ayin liyesh every single second of its existence. But at the same token, The Rebbe took the entire godliness that can be seen in this world, and as explained previously, the Rebbe, in Hebrew we know every word, every terminology is extremely accurate, so that's why the title of the world is, how we refer to world in Hebrew, is Olam. And Olam, again, stemming from the word Helem, meaning that the godliness and the Koyach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is constantly giving strength and life into the world, is not seen. However, here we come to Shabbos, as well as the idea of Torah. Both of them have this same thought within them, that their goal is to uplift and elevate the person, that the person should reveal the elokus, the godliness that is within the world, and should take off the cover, the Helem which the Rebbe created on the world. The Rebbe created a Helem, a cover, how godliness is not seen. And elokus is in a Helem, and it is not obvious. However, this is the goal of Torah as well as the goal of Shabbos, to reveal that godliness should be seen and felt in this world. Based on what the Gemara tells us, that lekula alme b'Shabbos nitna Torah, that everybody holds that Torah was given on Shabbos, still we have something very interesting. In Eretz Yisrael, where they celebrate only one day of Shavuos, Shavuos will never fall out today to be on a Shabbos. In other words, now that we have a fixed calendar, the calendar was set up by Hillel, so there's the way Hillel set up the calendar, it is impossible for Shavuos to fall out on for Shavuos, meaning the first day of Shavuos, excuse me, to fall out on a Shabbos. This will not happen. Why? Because if Shavuos falls out on a Shabbos, it means that the first day of Pesach has to be on a Friday. And this, according to the klal, loy bidu Pesach, that the first day of Pesach cannot come out neither on a Monday or Wednesday or Friday. So Mamela, we cannot have the first day of Shavuos as well, not on a Shabbos. However, now that we are in Golus, and we have 2 days of Yontif, so this is an inyan which we gain through being in Golus, that we can bring ourselves into a position of saying Zman Matan Teiraseinu, which this is how we celebrate Shavuos and davening and a benching as well. We express ourselves Zman Matan Teiraseinu. We can say it not only on the date which HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the Torah, but we can also say it on the day of the week, which is a Shabbos, as the case was this year, that the second day of Shavuos fell out on a Shabbos. So on this Shabbos, we can say Zman Matan Teiraseinu on the Shabbos. And this is something that the Rebbe was explaining, that this is something which we gain through Golus, something which without Golus we wouldn't be able to have this. However, one of the inyanim which we gain through Golus is the fact that we can have a Shavuos that should fall out to be on a Shabbos. So here we are back to the original day of other Yomim Tovim. The Rebbe says we go primarily according to the day of the calendar. Every Yontif, how do we celebrate a Yontif? It's that and that, this and this day in the month. A possibility that the Yontif should be like it was the very first time, we can also have. Not to go far, this year Pesach. This year Pesach came out to be the very same way as the Pesach was when the year the Yidden left Mitzrayim. However, Shavuos, the only way we can have Shavuos on the day of the week, which is a Shabbos, because as just mentioned, everybody agrees that the Rebbe gave the Torah on Shabbos. To be able to say on a Shabbos, Zman Matan Teiraseinu, this we can only have in Golus. The Rebbe brought an example from an Indian in Nigla. There's a klal, there's a general rule, Lifnei Iver Leisitein Michsha, that in front of a blind person, you're not allowed to put something that he should trip. However, the Gemara learns up from this pasuk that not only is it meant literally, but it has a deeper meaning. It means that we are not allowed to mislead anybody. In other words, in a case where any particular person is, so to speak, blind, in other words, where a person is strange in an area, we are not allowed to give him a false advice. We cannot give him an Eitzah She'ena Higenes, as the Gemara refers to it. If a person does do it, he is again over on this lav of Lifnei Iver Leisitein Michsha. Because it's the same idea. Here the person is blind in this issue, and we are putting a michshel, we're putting an obstacle in front of him. Rabbi said it's discussed in Achronim, is this thought of Lifnei Iver Leisitein Michsha a general thought? In other words, it's a general idea. And it applies to all mitzvahs and to all cases. Wherever applicable, we can use the thought of Lifnei Iver Leisitim Michshav. Or, no, it is a separate Isur in each and every case. Let's bring another example. We know there's a din, all halachas are bound with shiurim. Person is not allowed to eat something which is treif, there's a shiur. What's considered eating? Shiur is b'kezayis. Question arises, what's about a chotzi shiur if he does not eat the full quantity that is asur? So we know the famous Gemara tells us, chotzi shiur asur min haTorah. So the question arises as follows. When a person transgresses and eats a chotzi shiur, is he over on the isur of chotzi shiur, which is a general isur, which is applicable wherever we can use it, or the pshat is different? In each and every isur min haTorah, there's another prat. There's an isur that tells us we're not allowed to eat this particular item, the full shiur. There's also another isur. But when we eat a chotzi shiur, we don't get an einish, we don't get the penalty which comes for eating this particular thing. However, we were over on this isur as well, not by eating the full shiur, but by eating the chotzi shiur. In other words, the question is this chotzi shiur asur min haTorah? A general thought, we take the chotzi shiur and we apply it wherever we can, or further than that, each and every isur comes along with an isur on a full shiur, and together with it there's an isur on a chotzi shiur. And the difference would be the isur on the full shiur, the person gets malchus or whatever the case would be in that particular isur, where he only eats a chotzi shiur, he was over on the isur chaylev, but he wasn't over on the isur chaylev to the extent that he should get malchus, or whatever the einish would be on this particular isur. The same the Rebbe says applies when we talk b'negei Yontif Sheni Shel Golius. There's a general concept Yontif Sheni Shel Golius. Yontif Sheni applies to all Yomim Tovim. In general, every Yontif, now that we are in Golus, there's an additional day which can be referred to as Yontif Sheni Shel Golius. Or is it different? Each and every Yontif separately brings about its additional day, the Yontif Sheni Shel Golius. As the Rebbe stressed, here by Shavuos it is particularly important to learn that it is something special in Shavuos, because here we are gaining the fact that not just is it a Yontif Sheni Shel Golius, by every Yontif you have the second day. Here we have something more than that, and something more than that we get only because it is Shavuos. The fact that we can have the second day of Yontif and it should fall out on the same day of the week when the Rebbe Shataka gave Yidden the Torah. And when is this the day of Shabbos? So Mela the Rebbe says how appropriate it is now that we have already gone through Shavuos, and naturally, by all means, everybody probably took upon himself additional acceptances as a result of celebrating the Yontif of Shavuos. But how much more so, and how appropriate is it to add on whatever we have accepted upon ourselves on the Yontif of Shavuos, and this Shabbos we should accept upon ourselves to do new things, new inyanim, additional inyanim, because this is a Shabbos of such great significance. It's the very first Shabbos after Matan Torah. And besides that, it is a Shabbos when we are reading Parshas Naso. And this year, as a result of the kviyos that Shavuos came out to be on a Shabbos, we learned Parshas Naso for 2 weeks in a row. Normally each Seder is read for a week. However, this year we learned Parshas Naso for 2 weeks. What's the pshat Naso? Naso is Rosh B'nai Gershon Gam Haim. Naso means to elevate. So Mamela, this kviyus should bring about a spiritual elevation in all of us in a real high level, in a double sense, because being that this year we read Parshas Naso twice, so it should bring about a double elevation to a real high madrege that the results and acceptances which we will all accept upon ourselves, and good inyanim which we will take along from the Yontif of Shavuos, as well as from the Shabbos that follows the Yontif of Shavuos, which is today's Shabbos, should all be on a real high level. As a result of this kviyas, the Rebbe says, we come to a new shaila. The Rebbe says this shaila he had not seen in Rishonim. However, in more later svarim he did come across this shaila. Shaila would be people from Eretz Yisrael that are here now for Yontif. If a person from Eretz Yisrael is here now, he's missing the Kriyas HaTorah of Parshas Ba'al Lo Yisrael. Today in Eretz Yisrael, they did not read Parshas Naso. Today, this morning in Eretz Yisrael, they read Pashas Bahaloischa. Now, if somebody who was here for Yontif and stood over Shabbos, and he's going back this week to Eretz Yisrael, he's going to be missing out in the Kriya of Pashas Bahaloischa. Of Naso. No, of Bahaloischa, pardon me. Naso he heard today.
Oh, it's going back. Right.
Eretz Yisrael read last Shabbos Naso, because they did not have a Yontif. And today they are reading Bahaloischa. So if someone that stood here was here last week and was here this week, now that he's going back to Eretz Yisrael, he missed the Kriya of Bahaloischa.
So he missed the Kriya last week because Naso was there.
Naso he heard here. If he heard Naso here. Today he heard it.
Last week he missed it.
But as long as he at least he heard it today. But Bahaloischa, obviously, he doesn't have word to hear. As well, the Rebbe says, it will come to later weeks. The question can happen vice versa. Somebody will come to Eretz Yisrael, will miss the Kriya of whatever Seder is being read that Shabbos in Eretz Yisrael, because he's listening to our Kriyas HaTorah here. Which this is a Shaila B'Negei HaHalacha, which arises as a result of this Kviyas. As well, it'll have an effect this year also, B'Negei, the saying of Pirkei Avos. For those that say Pirkei Avos after Shavuos as well, as it's mentioned in the Siddur, Yesh Noyegin to say Pirkei Avos between Pesach and Shavuos, everyone says. However, there are those that feel to say Pirkei Avos after Shavuos as well. So in Eretz Yisrael, Pirkei Avos was said last Shabbos. Last Shabbos was the first Shabbos after Shavuos. So they said Perek Aleph. However, for us here, by us it was Shavuos. On Shavuos we don't say Pirkei Avos. We start saying Pirkei Avos when the Shabbos after Shavuos. So there's also a difference in the saying of Pirkei Avos. While today we are saying Perek Aleph, and Eretz Yisrael they're already saying Perek Beis. The Rebbe says we find something interesting in the Mamorim of the Rabbeim, that there were many Shabbosim after Shavuos. Usually a Maimah begins either with a pasuk of that given Seder, or there are Mamorim that begin with one of the Mishnahs in the Pirkei Avos. So the Rebbe says it's very obvious that if one of the Rabbeim would begin a Maimah with a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, that he just wouldn't only begin the Maimah that way, that means that he would already say Pirkei Avos on that Shabbos as well, after Shavuos also. The Rebbe says it is not clear to him to say if the Rabbeim would say Pirkei Avos every year after Shavuos, or it was only on certain years, like when we find instances that Mamorim begin with a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, so that year they definitely said Pirkei Avos on the Shabbosim, after Shavuos as well, till Rosh Hashanah. But whatever the case is, the Rebbe says, being that we do not know whether the Rabbeim did it every year, they did it only in certain years, so we can follow and do it on a kviyistic basis, do it on a permanent basis, and every year, even in the Shabbosim after Shavuos as well. So therefore, as the custom is, by the Rebbe Farbrengens, that Pirkei Avos is said on that Shabbos, the Rebbe also in the Farbrengen interprets a Mishnah that has a shaykhs to the Perek. And in today's Farbrengen, the Rebbe learned a Mishnah in Perek Rishon. As just mentioned, we here in Bnei Chutz La'aretz begin today Perek Rishon. Perek Rishon, which begins with Moshe Kibel Torah. The third Mishnah begins Antignus Ish Seichai Kibel Mishimon HaTzadik. Antignus Ish Seichai had received his learnings in Torah from Shimon HaTzadik. So if we recall, in the Shabbosim before Matan Torah, as the Rebbe used the expression, this year when the Rebbe was learning Pirkei Avos, the Rebbe introduced a new pshat in all these Mishnahs. Wherever the Mishnah uses an expression that one Tana was mekabel from another Tana, and then the Mishnah goes on saying whatever this Tana said, so we must say, the Rebbe says, that the fact, for instance right here, the fact that Antignus Ish Seichai was mekabel from Shimon HaTzadik is negeya to the saying of Shimon HaTzadik. Otherwise the Mishnah would not mention it here. To the saying of Antignus Ish Seichai, I'm sorry. So whatever Antignus Ish Seichai is teaching us now in Mishnah Gimel, which we will see in a minute, is so. Why is he stressing this fact? Because he gained most of his knowledge from Shimon HaTzadik. That is why he, as a result, teaches us Al tiyu ka'avodim ha'mishamshem esarav al menas l'kabel pras, ela havu ka'avodim ha'mishamshem esarav shaloi al menas l'kabel pras. What is he telling us? Don't be like servants that serve your masters to be rewarded, but be like servants that serve your masters and don't look for any type of reward. Then he concludes, V'yehi mayra shamayim aleichem, and let the fear of heaven be above you, be upon you. Firstly, the Rebbe said in general that the name Antigonus Ish Seichai, this Tana, we find very, very little about him in Gemara. He's very rarely quoted. But here we have him, he's quoted. And being a disciple from Shimon HaTzadik. Who was Shimon HaTzadik? The Mishnah itself tells us. He was one of the leftovers, Mishiyarei Knesset HaGdeilah. And the Anshe Knesset HaGdeilah, they were the people that have arranged and set up all the halachas for Yidden. They have set up everything. They've set up the Nusach HaTfilah and so forth. Shimon HaTzadik was from the remainder of Knesset HaGdeilah. And Antigonus Ish Seichai was a close disciple of him. Let us look back to Mishnah Beis. In Mishnah Beis we find that what does Shimon HaTzadik tell us? That the world rests on three pillars. Ala Torah, Vala Avodah, Val Gemilas Chasod. Torah, Avodah meaning davening, and Gemilas Chasod. Behemshech, in continuation to this Mishnah, we come to the third Mishnah, which is the teaching of Antigonus Ish Seichai. What does he tell us? As just said, Al tiyu ka'avodim ha'mishamshem esarav. So first of all, the Rebbe says, if we look carefully throughout these Mishnahs, we see every Tana tells us three inyonim. Shimon HaTzadik says, Allah Shloisha Dvarim Ha'olam Ha'emet, Allah Torah, Allah Avodah, Allah Gemilas Chasodim. It's three. First Mishnah is also three. Havim Mesunim Badin, Hamidu Talmidim Harbe, Vasus Yag La Torah. It's again three inyonim. So the Rebbe says we must say that the teaching of Antigonus is also three inyonim. Firstly, he tells us, Al tiyu ka'avodim ha'mishamshem esarav al menas l'kabel pras, which is one inyan. Ella is already a second inyan. Ella, but you shall be. In other words, first he's telling us, the Rebbe used the expression, there's the sur me'ra and there's the nasei toiv. First he says, Al tiyu ka'avodim ha'mishamshem esarav al menas l'kabel pras. Then comes a higher phase, a different madrege. Ella, this Ella, from the Ella itself, the Rebbe says we see that it's a new inyan. Ella havu ka'avodim ha'mishamshem esarav shelo yal menas l'kabel pras. This is inyan number 2. Then we come to the third inyan. The third inyan is v'hi me'ir shamayim aleich. What shaykhus does this have to the previous Mishnah? Previous Mishnah stresses the greatness of Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasod. We know the Chazal tell us in many places that through learning Torah, Yidden are considered B'nai Malachim, princes. We find in certain places in Chazal, the Rebbe says, not only are Yidden considered like a prince, but like a king itself. Yidden are considered royal children. What makes a Yid a royal child? The fact that he learns Torah. The fact that he has a shaykhus for Torah. So a Yid may think he's following the instruction of Shimon HaTzadik, how important the learning of Torah is. Torah is that great. Torah is so precious. Torah puts him into a completely different category. Torah brings him into a category that he's considered a ben melech. He's considered a melech. So if so, he will demand that he wants everything that a melech should be getting. So the Mishnah is telling us Antigonus Ish Seichai is coming in continuation to that and says, true, you are take a melech, you are a ben melech, but Al tiyu ka'avodim ha'mishamshem esarav al menas l'kabel pras. Your attitude has to be of such that you shall not seek the reward from the Rebishter. The Rebishter on his hand, Taka has to give it to us. The Rebishter's inyan is, and here the Rebbe elaborated that the Rebishter has taken for his slaves and for his servants royal people. So therefore it's the obligation of the master to treat his slave, his servant accordingly. Mamela, if his servant is of such caliber that he's from a royal a royal child, and he's a king or a prince, therefore he has to be treated that way. So this is a cheshbon for the Rebishter to make. The Rebishter Take has to treat every Yid and give him an abundance of everything and treat him perfectly and give him everything like every Yid Take deserves. However, we Yidden on our hand, we cannot demand from the Rebishter. We have to learn Torah, not because we want that the Rebishter should reward us. Our learning of Torah has to be, we have to learn Torah because the Rebishter wants us to. But not that we shall receive reward from the Rebishter, that the Rebishter should give us a reward for learning Torah, being that learning Torah put us into a category of Nei Malachim, so we will say, Rabbeinu Shalom, pay us back for that. But we cannot say that. Excuse me. Then he goes weiter. Ela havu ka'avodim ha'meshamshem esarav shelo yalmanas l'kabel pras. This, the Rebbe teaches, is a higher madrega. And this has to do with the inyan of avodah. The second major pillar which Shimon HaTzadik tells us. You know, the Rambam tells us that a person is obligated to daven to the Rebishter. It's explained in Chasidus that when a person is missing something, he's not allowed to turn to anybody, only to Hashem. That is the original source of tefillah, is that when we daven to the Rebishter, that the Rebishter should fulfill our needs. Here the Mishnah is demanding from a person a very high level. Mishnah is demanding, Havu ka'avodim ha'meshamshem esarav. We are davening. Our inyan is we are turning to Hashem. However, we are mispalel to the Rebishter, but at the same time, naturally this is a tremendous madrege. We are mispalel to the Rebishter, and we want the Rebishter should fulfill our needs, but at the same time, this is not our major goal in turning to the Rebishter. We are turning to the Rebishter because we want to get close to Hashem. We want to be zech mizdabek and unite with the Rebishter. However, the fact of the Rebishter giving us our gashmiistic needs and giving us providing us with our materialistic needs, which this should come as a result of tefillah, this is not what we are seeking. So this is, again, it's a very high madrega naturally. But what is he telling us? In other words, we have to be mishamesh esarav, we have to want to associate ourselves with the Rebishter, but not look for the reward. Mishnah goes on, V'hi moira shamayim aleichem. And the Rebbe said we find in Ovis the Rab Nosson, which is also, it's a Masechta which is called Ovis the Rab Nosson, from the Tana Rab Nosson. There we find, in fact, that's where we find Benegeya. That's one of the very few places we find about Antignus Ish Seichel. We mentioned previously that we find very rarely about him in Mishnah or Gemara or Chazal. There we find how the story about Tzaduk Obaisis, and how it all originated. When they heard this lesson from Antignus Ish Seichel, that Antignus Ish Seichel is instructing, Al tiyu kavodim ha'meshamshem esarav al manas l'kabel pras. But we should want to serve the Rebishter without any reward. And naturally, when we say without any reward, we mean even without any spiritual type of reward as well. So this tuned them off. They said, if to serve the Rebishter, not seeking for any reward, not any materialistic reward, okay, but not even a spiritual reward if we're talking about Gan Eden or any other type of spiritual reward, not even that as well, if so, turn them away from Yiddishkeit. That's what we find the whole mindset in Ovis the Rab Nosson. So that is why he concludes here the Mishnah, V'hi moira shamayim aleichem. Once he comes out with such strong instructions how a person is never supposed to seek for any type of reward. No gashmistic reward, no ruchnistic reward. He's davening. So he's not even looking for the inyanim that he's davening, for his missing inyanim to be fulfilled. He wants his tefillah to be a total association with the Eibishter. So for a person to be able to properly fulfill that, he has to also come on to the third inyan which Antignus Ish Seichel is telling us. V'hi moira shamayim aleichem. That he should have proper fear of heaven, proper fear of Hashem on him. Because otherwise, he cannot fulfill the first half of the Mishnah of really being a true, dedicated servant to the Rebishter, not looking for any reward. If he's in the level of V'hi moira shamayim aleichem, then he can do it. Otherwise, he can't. Also, the Rebbe teaches V'hi Meira Shamayim Aleichem has a strong shaychus to Gemilas Chasadim. Here the Rebbe referred to the Gemara. The Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin that a Gentile once approached Rabbi Akiva, and he asked him, why do you go out and feed the poor? If the Rebbe created this particular person that he's poor, so you're going against the will of Hashem. The Rebbe wants that he should be poor. So, Vihi Meira Shamayim Aleichem is the pshat that as a result of Vihi Meira Shamayim Aleichem, we go ahead and provide the needs of all the poor, and the needs, spiritual needs, as well as the physical needs, the materialistic needs, whatever we know a person needs, which just comes about as a result of the third category, the category of Gemilas Chasadim. When can we really be involved in Gemilas Chasadim properly? When we have Meira Shamayim Aleichem, because otherwise the shaila that goy asked Rabbi Akiva would be bothering us. But if we know that the Rebbe does not want us to take that in consideration, the Rebbe wants that when we see a Yid is lacking something, it is our union to go ahead and get involved and see and help this person. So this comes as a result of Meira Shamayim Aleichem. The Zayar which the Rebbe learned today, it's the Zayar in Parshas Naso, and the Zayar there talks about a pasuk in Chavakuk, the Rebbe says, which is a very famous pasuk, because this pasuk is said in the Haftarah of Shavuos. And the Haftarah of Shavuos, there's a pasuk, the very beginning, Hashem shamati shemacha yareisi. Hashem, I have heard about you, yareisi, this has brought me about to fear. So the Zayar tells us that they were discussing this pasuk. So Reb Shimon said, Anon bechavivusa tal yemilsa. That by us, it depends on chavivusa, on love. In other words, our attitude to the Rebishter is not an attitude of fear, it's an attitude of love. And he quotes a pasuk, D'chsiv v'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha. Goes ahead and quotes another pasuk, Uksiv me'avas Hashem eschem. Second pasuk. Uksiv, there's a third pasuk, Ahavti eschem amar v'goyim. In other words, Ahavti eschem amar Hashem. Hashem says, I love you, Yid. So he brings these three psukim, and as the Rebbe's father goes into a Kabbalah explanation, why three psukim? Why is it not sufficient one pasuk? But a question which the Rebbe raised today is, firstly, we have to understand the comment of Reb Shimon. Shimon says they were talking about a pasuk in Habakkuk, which tells us how great we have to fear Hashem. Hashem shamati shemacha yoreisi. It has brought about a feeling of fear. So what does Reb Shimon respond? Anon bechavivus tal yemilsa. We have a feeling of chavivus, a feeling of love to the Rebishter. What's about fear? Fearing Hashem is one of the major mitzvahs. I mean, we can't just do away with an union of Yiras Hashem. That Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya. He discusses the greatness that Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem are two great fundamentals in serving the Rebishter. But at the same time, Yiras Hashem as well. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya keeps on stressing how Yira Yelah, at the high level of fear for Hashem, how this is a key to the highest levels in getting associated with the Rebishter. So here we find in the Zayah that it does away with the whole union of Yira, with the whole union of fear, and it's, first of all, it's a pasuk. But not only is it a pasuk, it's an union which is constantly mentioned in the Torah and constantly stressed in the Torah, how we are supposed to fear Hashem. So what does Reb Shimon ben Yochai say? No, we don't get involved in the pasuk of Hashem shamati shemacha yoreisi. We approach the Rebishter as a feeling of chavivus, as a feeling of love. So this question the Rebbe raised, I don't recall if there was a teretz. However, an union which the Rebbe did explain is there are two psukim. Actually, the Zohar brings three, but the Rebbe pointed out very strongly two of these psukim. One pasuk is Ma'avas Hashem Eschem. Ma'avas Hashem Eschem. What's the continuation of the pasuk? It's a pasuk in Chumash Dvarim that says that as a result of HaKadosh Baruch Hu loving you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu has taken you into Eretz Yisrael and given you all the goods and so forth. So this pasuk right away tells us the result of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's love. What's the other pasuk? Ahavti eschem omar Hashem. The Rebishter said, I love you. I love you, Yid. So in Tanakh we find that Yidden ask, how is the love expressed? Continuation to this pasuk. So the Rebishter responds, Haloi och Esav leYankov. Esav and Yankov are brothers. V'Eyev es Yankov, v'es Esav son Esi. I express love to Yankov and hatred to Esav. So therefore, this shows that I love the Yidden and I do not love the Goyim. Rebbe says it's a very, very big and deep difference between these two psukim. First pasuk says, "Me'avas Hashem eschem," from love to you, Yidden. The Rebbe right away delivered something to the Yidden. He gave him something substantial. He gave him something tangible. He gave him something. What is the second pasuk? Rebbe said the second pasuk does not answer that as a result of Ahavti eschem amar Hashem, so Yidden are sitting in an eretz zovas cholav advash and have all their needs, and Goyim, the Rebbe used the expression, and Goyim are being oisgerissen. It is not so. So we must say that the pasuk is not talking about such a time. The pasuk is talking about a time of Golus, like the time that we are in right now, where the Rebbe cannot say that the Ave to Yidden is shown as something that something mamoshistic and something which is we can point out and say that we could point out and say that the Rebbe is treating the Yidden, and it's obvious how he's treating them differently than the Goyim. And that is why the pasuk has to come into a whole teretz that the Rebbe that Yidden ask, where is the love seen? And the Rebbe answers that Esav and Yankov are brothers, and still I have a hatred to Esav and a love to Yankov. The Rebbe said, and in this position, Yidden are sitting for 1900 years already. It's a matzav that Yidden are not in Eretz Zavas Cholav Udvash anymore, and Yidden are in Golus. And the Rebbe continued, Va'adayin lo noishanu, and we have still not been helped, and we have still not been answered. However, the Rebbe is wanting and begging that the Yidden should turn to him, and Yidden should ask for the Golus to stop, and Yidden should strongly and seriously beg from the Rebbe, we want Mashiach now. And not like those that claim that it's not our Indian to give them the Rebbe instructions, that the Rebbe should send us Mashiach. On the contrary, it's something which we recite daily in davening. And we conclude davening with the Mishnah, She'ebana Beis HaMikdash b'mheira v'yameinu. We're asking the Rebbe that the Rebbe should give us Mashiach, and the Rebbe should give us the Beis HaMikdash. And where was this Mishnah taken from? This is a Mishnah which is also a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. And together with this Mishnah, we conclude our davening daily. In other words, our Indian is to beg from the Rebbe that it's kvar kolu kol hakitzin. It is the furthest time and the furthest point that the Rebbe should put an end to the Golus. And we are in the Rebbe kept on repeating how we are in this position for over 1900 years. And it is enough to be in such a position. And that the love from the Rebbe should be such a love that can be brought down into a Peil Mamish, not just ideologically that the Rebbe should answer, just like the first pasuk, Ma'avas Hashem eschem, as a result of love from the Rebbe. The Rebbe gave Yidden Eretz Yisrael when the Rebbe took the Yidden into Eretz Yisrael the very first time. The very same now as well. It is the proper time already, the Rebbe is continuing, that the Rebbe should take us out of Golus and should hear our tefillas and bakoshes, how we are begging for the coming of Mashiach. And each and every Yid wants it, that Mashiach should come and take us all out of Golus, and the Rebbe should give us the third Beis HaMikdash, and should take us all out of Golus, and we should be brought back to a Geula she'ein achar Golus, because as it is quoted in Sfarim, that this Geula will be such that will not have any Golus coming after it whatsoever. Then the Rebbe learned pasuk this week, Sedre, and the Rebbe said, we know how accurate Rashi is, so we will use, as the Rebbe says, there are certain times that he learns an Inyan and Rashi which requires an explanation, in other words, a Rashi which is not understood. There are other times that there's an Inyan in Chumash which obviously requires an explanation, and we have to see why Rashi, whose Inyan is learning Pshat and everything, does not say Pshat in this particular Inyan. And this is something at the end of this week's Sedre. In Pasuk Pei Daled, where the Pasuk concludes about all the Korbanos which were brought by the Nesiim, and the Pasuk tells us exactly Karas Kesef Shtei Mesri. So Rashi comments, Heim shehisnadvu v'lo ira behem psul. This is the exact kairos which the Shvatim, all the Shvatim brought, the plates which were used by the Chanukas HaMishkan. V'lo ira behem psul, and nothing went wrong with this plate. Kara is a plate. The source for this Rashi, though Rashi does not mention it, is a Sefri. However, again, Rashi is not bound to bring every Sefri, because Sefri's Inyan is not Pshuta Shel Mikra. Rashi's Inyan is Pshuta Shel Mikra. So Rashi here is telling us in Pshuta Shel Mikra why the Pasuk has to give us an exact count for the Kairas Kesef. Further, if we look into the Vaita Dike Psukim, for example, Pasuk Pei Zayin, the Pasuk by Mafta, Pasuk says, Kol ha-baka la'oila, all the baka that was used for Kol Ma'ilas, again, Shnei Masa Parim, Elim Shnei Masa, Kvasim B'nei Shana Shnei Masa. Pasuk tells us exactly a grand total what was used for all the Karbonos. Then Pasuk Peches says, V'choil b'kar zevach hashlamim, Esrim v'arba Parim. Pasuk Pei Zayin discusses what was used for Oilas. Pasuk Peches discusses what was used for Shlom. Again, a breakdown exactly. If we look into Sefri tells us why the pasuk here has to give a general breakdown, which karbanos went for Eila, which karbanos went for Shlam. Rashi does not quote the Sefri anymore. So if Rashi saw a need to explain why the pasuk tells us exactly about the Kairas Kesef Shtei Mesrei, why doesn't Rashi see the same need to explain on the breakdown of the Karbanos? What does the Sefri say? Sefri says that being that we have previously, there are many psukim here, and many psukim tell us about all the different types of par echad ben baka, ayel echad, keves echad, and the pasuk does not say by each thing exactly for what type of kolbim it went. So that is why when this entire union is brought to an end, the pasuk gives us a general instruction what all the behemoths went for, what type of karbanos they went for. That's what the Sefri says. A reason why the pasuk Pei Zayin and pasuk Peches have to give an exact breakdown what went for Oilos and what went for Shlomim, because when we look back in the pasuk we find, for example, Par Echad Ben Bokar, Ayel Echad, Keves Echad. Pasuk doesn't say exactly what happened with the Kol. So if the pasuk doesn't say exactly, that is why at the very end of the Parsha the pasuk tells us. Why doesn't Rashi quote the Sefri as well? Another question which the Rebbe asked is, Karbanos were brought here so that every Shevet should have a chance to bring a Kol. It comes to the 11th day, which is the first pasuk in Shvi, pasuk Ayin Beis. There's an expression, B'yoim ashtei osa yoim nasi levnei osher. On the 11th day, it was the nasi levnei osher pagil benoch. Rebbe asks, an expression in Chumash, ashtei osa, should mean 11, is a very rare expression. Usually, achad osa means 11. Why does the pasuk here refrain from the usual expression and comes on to an expression ashtei yasar yom? And again, if it's so unusual, Rashi should comment on it. And we don't find Rashi should comment why the expression here is ashtei yasar yom. Firstly, the Rebbe answers, there's no need for Rashi to comment the rest of the Sefri and the further psukim Pei Zayin and Psukim Peches. Very obvious. Why? Because if we look back into all these psukim, for example, pasuk which says Kaf Achas, Par Echad Ben Baka, Ayel Echad, Keves Echad, Ben Shnosei. However, the pasuk concludes La'oila. So the pasuk really does tell us what happened. However, the pasuk does not say after every behemoth. The pasuk says at the end of the pasuk. So Rashi holds that this is not a pshuta shel mikra explanation. To say that the child who's learning Chumash does not know exactly what happened with all the Karbanos, the child does know. Why? True, he's not told at the mention of each and every Karban, together with the mention of the Karban. In other words, Par Echad Ben Bokar. The pasuk doesn't say what was done with the Par Echad Ben Bokar. However, at the end of the pasuk concludes that everything that happened with these Karbanos was L'Yayla, or the same thing by L'Shlomim, or the same thing L'Chatos.
How do you know? Maybe it's just the last animal that goes on.
So so Rashi is learning that the pshat in the pasuk, the child who's learning pshat in the pasuk, realizes that the la'oilo or the l'shlamim applies to the entire pasuk. Otherwise, it would be misleading. Otherwise, it would be misleading that it would fatumel the child. This last thing is this kolb. What's taka with the first kolbanis? With the first behemoth? So this in itself is an indication that the entire pasuk went for this kolb. Whatever the case may be. So, and there's no need for Rashi to say it. For example, the Rebbe brought another example. Rashi told us in Chumash that the Yidden are counted many times. Rashi gives a reason why. Being that the Rebbe loves Yidden so that is why we find several times in Chumash that the Yidden were counted. So we already know that when there is an idea of love to a certain thing, to a certain inyan, the inyan can be repeated. It's a tremendous question here. Why is there a need to repeat each and every kolb, each and every shevet separately? Pasuk could have said one general thing, that how the first shevet was makriv, and to go on saying that all the following shvatim did the same. Pasuk doesn't do it. Pasuk repeats to the exact detail that each and every shevet did the same thing, and the pasuk repeats it again. Why? And Rashi doesn't explain why. And this is something which obviously the child should be troubled with. Still, Rashi doesn't explain it why, because Rashi relies on the explanation which he gave already in Chumash previously, that when there's an inyan of chiba, mitoy chibason, just like the Rebbe counts the Yidden several times. Why? Why is it repeated the count of the Yidden? Because the Rebbe loves the Yidden. Same thing here. This inyan is so dear to Hashem, it's so precious to Hashem. Each and every detail, how each and every shevet participated in the Chalukas HaMishkan, that the Torah repeats exactly again, though each shevet did the same thing that the other shevet did. Today they did the same thing what they did yesterday and what they did 2 days ago. But it is so dear by Hashem that it is repeated constantly. Benegeya, the question of the rare expression of Ashtei Yasa, this the Rebbe said is something which Rashi usually does not get involved to answer such type of questions. And the Rebbe brought an example of Bayom Hashvi Nosi Livnei Ephraim Elishama ben Amihud, and at times we find the very same name, we find the name in the Torah differently, not Amihud but with a Reish. Amihud. I think it's on this name the Rebbe brought.
Ruel and Duel.
Ruel and Duel, right. I'm sorry. Ruel and the Uel. It's the same name. Why is it the times used Ruel and the time used the Uel? And Rashi still doesn't comment on it. Why? Because there's certain inyanim which the child does, it's not out of a major question to the child that should arouse a comment, that Rashi should give an explanation. Times usually the Torah uses the expression for 11 would be Achad Osayim and Achaname, but at the same time when the Torah uses an expression Ashtei Osayim, it is not something so out of the ordinary that it should bring about a comment from Rashi. Rabbi went back to Pirkei Avos. Firstly, the Rebbe touched the Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. But Moshe, we know that Moshe was known for his modesty, for being an Onav. And Sinai, the Gemara tells us, the Chazal tell us that Sinai was the mountain, the Nomich Mikol Torah. It was not a high mountain, it was the lowest of all the mountains. And that is why this mountain merited that the Rebbe should give the Torah on it. So this is again the association between Moshe and Sinai, because both stand for an inyan of Anova. It's expressed very strongly in Moshe and it's expressed very strongly in Sinai. And that is why Moshe was the one who merited to be Kibel Torah Sinai. Also the Rebbe learned Pshat, while mentioning the first Mishnah, we find the expression V'hemidu Talmidim Harbe. They said the very first Mishnah, it's also broken down into 3 inyanim, and one of the 3 inyanim is Hemidu Talmidim Harbe. Erect many students. What's the pshat Hemidu Talmidim Harbe? Mishnah could have used a different expression. The Mishnah could have used an expression Tilmidu Talmidim Harbe, teach to many students. What's the lashon Hemidu? Hemidu is to put, to erect. What's the pshat? So the Rebbe is learning the pshat is that here the Mishnah is giving us a general instruction that when we create Talmidim, when we put when we teach Torah to others and we share knowledge of Torah with others, it has to be in such a format that the student should become a maimed. The student should become a person who is capable of standing on his own feet as well, in spiritual sense, as far as going ahead and being able to teach Torah to others. That is why Mishnah uses the expression here, Ha'emidu talmidim harbe, not just tilmidu, teach Torah to many talmidim. That's not the idea. The idea is to teach Torah to many talmidim, and at the same time that the many talmidim should be put into a position of oimdim. They should be standing very firm and very strong in the knowledge of Torah and the knowledge of Yiddishkeit, which we are introducing into them, which we are sharing into them. Towards the very end of the Farbrengen, Rebbe mentioned, today is Yudalet Sivan, 14 days in the month of Sivan. And right after 14 days in the month of Sivan, we go into 15 days in the month of Sivan. What is the 15th day of Sivan? Is the day that the Frierdiker Rebbe was arrested in 1927 in Russia. And after being arrested for 17 days, on Gimel Tammuz, that is when he was taken out of prison and he was sent away to Kostroma. He was arrested for being involved in spreading Torah and spreading Yiddishkeit. However, this is the day that Rebbe brought out today, which led to the Frierdiker Rebbe's leaving Russia, because as a result of him being imprisoned and then later they released him, they wanted very strongly that the Rebbe should leave the country so that she did not continue with the spreading of Yiddishkeit in Russia. Memela, this is the day that led to a new era in Afatzas Hamayonis. And how strong the Frierdiker Rebbe was involved in the spreading of Hasidus as well as the spreading of Yiddishkeit in Russia. However, when he left Russia, it's self-understood that simply because of the circumstances, Baruch Hashem, that changed. And as well further on when he came to the United States, this brought about to a much stronger reaction as far as the spreading of Yiddishkeit, as well as far as the spreading of Hasidus. And this is the time when the Frierdiker Rebbe began instructing Hasidim that Hasidus should be not only in its original source in the Hebrew language as well as in the Yiddish language, but these, as a result of him leaving Russia, this is when he began instructing that Hasidus should be translated into many other languages as well, which this in itself is a very strong move in the inyan of Afatzas Hamayonis.
Could you say what the Rebbe said about Bahaloscha, Shieta, Shela Hevest, Lala Mechaha, the Rebbe mentioned this? He mentioned in the earlier part of the Farbrengen that's the way you have to affect somebody with Yiddishkeit, that their flame should go up by itself.
After Parshas Naso, today we began already reading Parshas Bahaloischa. Parshas Bahaloischa begins with Bahaloischa Saneiros, how Aaron was instructed to go ahead and light the menorah in the Mishka. So Rashi comments, Shetehei shal heves oila me'eleha, that the menorah had to be lit in such a way that the flame should be going up by itself. And we know that Neir Hashem Nishmas Adam, every neshama is also compared to a nail, to a candle. So Hasidus always interprets this, that the same thing applies to a neshama of a Yid as well. That the neshama of a Yid has to be lit. There's the Aaron HaKoyin, who is lighting the neshama. In other words, the Nasi Hadoyer, who is Madlik, the neshama who's giving strength, each and every neshama to be lit. However, the neshama has to be lit in such a way that later the flame goes up within itself, and the neshama is powerful within itself to be able to conduct itself properly and suitable as it's suitable for a Neir Hashem Nishmas Adam.
And about the announcement that you had your father make?
Sorry, thank you. The Rebbe also mentioned in the Shavuos Dike Farbrengen very much, as well as in today's Farbrengen, that we should not forget about the inyan which is of extreme importance nowadays, to see to it that each and every Yid has an ois in the Sefer Torah. Sefer Torahs that are being written to bring about the Yesh Shishim Ribu Oisi Yis LaTorah, that each and every Yid has his ois in Torah, and every Yid has his shaykhs to Torah, to see to it, to reach out to those Yidden who as yet do not have an ois in the Sefer Torahs that are currently being written, to see to it that they all acquire oisius in the Sefer Torah. As the Rebbe expressed himself today, that Mashiach will come now, and we will go to greet Mashiach together with all these Sefer Torahs that are being written now for the unity of Klal Yisrael. In the course of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe also said to announce about a dinner for the yeshiva which will be taking place tomorrow, as well as the Siyum Sefer Torah which will be taking place, Siyum of Sefer Torah in Buffalo, New York, which will be taking place tomorrow in Buffalo. And after these two announcements were made, the Rebbe also said to announce that Mashiach is coming now.